Warriors, I am thrilled today to bring to you Landon Starbuck, straight from Tennessee. She is the founder of Freedom Forever, an American nonprofit working very hard to preserve your freedoms and help you understand everything that's going on right now in the United States. And also, number one warrior in my book, protecting children and raising awareness. Now, although Landon is in Tennessee, she works on the local, state, and national level, and I am proud to call her my friend. Welcome, Landon Starbuck, to the Warriors.
Oh, thank you, Lynn. You're an amazing warrior, and I'm just so honored to be on your show. You do incredible work. So
Uh,
thank you for having
well, thank you, Landon, because you are the one person I can always count on who does wonderful videos. And we know people are visual. Every day you're pumping out information. You are boots on the ground. You really put your money where your mouth is. I am so tired of a lot of chit chat, talk, not getting the work done, but you are really getting the work done. So I commend you for that. I'm honored. You make my life easier because I follow, you're on top of everything, breaking news, current, and just wonderful, wonderful videos on Instagram. And we'll get into that a little bit later on. I want to start with, I want to share your voice. I want to share your expertise. You can talk about whatever you want. Do you want to start it all a little bit with your background so people can understand who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for all the kind words. You've been
Of
an
course.
incredible support from day one. So you're just an incredible friend. I appreciate you. Well, I mean, let's see. Where do we start here? I think that I've talked a little bit on your show before about my experience in Hollywood. I was a Billboard charting artist, and I left Hollywood when I really discovered the underbelly, the sexual quid pro quo system that
Mm.
Hollywood operates under. I was a musician and I moved there very naive at 18, packed my car up, didn't know anyone. And it took me a long time to figure out how the system works, and really discovering the exploitation within it and some of the stuff that I saw, which I now know today is child trafficking and child exploitation. But at the time, I just thought this was normal. And part of that frame of reference was coming from a broken home myself, where I didn't know what those boundaries were. I didn't know what those things look like. And so I was going in very naive. And I had a series of experiences that enlightened me to the fact that this is how the system runs. And once I really realized that, I mean, it set me into a very deep depression. But from that depression, God spoke to my heart and really called me into this advocacy work. And I did my best to educate myself, being trauma informed and understanding the roots of all of this in every aspect. And really, my heart was called to focus in on children, because if we can't protect them, nothing else really matters. The demise of every nation starts with the targeting of children and the attack on their innocence. So that's what led me to my work today.
Wow. I think we can agree that there is a war on for our children, all of us, but the children in particular. And that has, really urged you to form this nonprofit, Freedom Forever. Now, tell us a little bit about that, because you also, I am so proud to say this, about a year ago, almost a year ago, you did the largest march on the border. So, and it's incredible what has, happened over the last year at the border. But let's talk about the roots of Freedom Forever, your mission, your vision, what's going on with that right now.
Yeah, Freedom Forever came to be because I've worked with different organizations throughout the years, and I really saw some gaps of sensitive topics, right, that just weren't being addressed. And the children in particular being exploited and coming into our country illegally, under force, fraud, and coercion from cartels, from traffickers. It just wasn't being talked about. It wasn't being focused on, and the resources, and still, unfortunately, are not there to address this issue, this crisis. And the conversation and narrative instead is kept on other facets of the border crisis. And so I really wanted to draw awareness, but also not just awareness, but put pressure on politicians to act, because all we hear all day long is them bloviate about how they're going to solve this and do this,
Right.
and then nothing gets done. And so I wasn't okay with that. And so I led this coalition, and so many incredible people stepped up to the plate. Tennesseans paid their own way, including myself, to go down there. We had generous donors help us do this demonstration, which ended up being the largest coalition form demonstration. We're actually thinking about doing another one. it was very effective. It got national attention. Tucker Carlson covered it. Breitbart News covered it. And it woke people up to the very real fact that children are exploited every single day at our southern border. And now we're seeing the other side of that. Now that these unaccompanied minors, and I always stop there to refocus the fact that unaccompanied minor means a child has already been exploited. Dropping a child off in the middle of the desert with Plan B, is not
Right.
a normal thing. And those children are raped and exploited at exponential rates, and in many cases they're taken from their parents. And so what efforts are being made to reunite them once they're here? Sadly, they're being unaccounted for. 1 in 3 of those children, the Biden administration has lost contact, unfortunately. And the standard of vetting, they're not doing background checks. They're spending millions in subcontracted contracts to care for these children, but there's no accountability. And they're not counting for the rapes. They're not accounting for the sexual abuse, the sex trafficking. They're hiding and suppressing these numbers because they don't want that narrative to get out of control. So it's a lot of work. In my organization, we try to expose that. We put in FOIA requests. We are essentially trying to be a watchdog for a lot of these things to inform people, but also, when necessary, to organize resistance efforts, accountability efforts, which span across everything from advocacy letters, FOIA requests, like I mentioned, and actual physical demonstrations. So, we do whatever we can to inform, expose, and activate activist warriors to combat these issues.
This is excellent news, Landon, because every day people will say to me, I don't, first of all, it's dark and overwhelming. So we both know nobody wants to really talk about dark and overwhelming, but to get their attention, if you just give it to them, you give them the information, you give them a couple of tools and resources, they'll jump on board. Just the other day down the street from me here in New York City, they are moving in, or they've already moved actually, 600 families into a hotel. And they're asking for 5,000 plus more rooms. It's all kind of murky in the dark. We're not really hearing this in the media. Maybe some of the people, maybe a Tucker, is definitely covering things. We don't hear. People are in the dark. So I want them to go to Freedom Forever, or the website, freedomforever. I like to say US, but it's freedomforever.us. How do you say it? Because I say it both ways.
I say freedomforever.us because we are focused on American children, American exploitation and trafficking, because it looks different here than it does everywhere else in the world. And we're narrowly focused on what's happening in our own backyard.
And I also want to point out, as you know, that something I'm getting, people to wake up to now that we're back to school, getting back to school, all of these children, at least here in New York, New Jersey, the Connecticut area, we call the tri-state area, these children are being put into our children's schools, right? And there aren't enough services. And I'm starting to get, just in the last week. Now, we don't start school here in New York until after Labor Day. So we have a couple of more weeks, but already I'm getting reports from some other schools that have started. These kids are in the classroom. So when people say or tune this out about the border, it is so urgent that we all know what's going on, because it's our tax dollars. It's our children. So what do you recommend? Let's talk about, there's a lot just in the last couple of days. School choice, I'm reading a lot. Of course, homeschooling is ideal, parochial, private, charter. But what about the poor mom, who can't do that? Like, what would you suggest? Because that's the other question I get a lot. What do you suggest we do if you have to keep your child in a public school? And again, this is going on in every single state, I dare say. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
So what would you suggest if they can't homeschool, they can't afford private, parochial, charter schools? I'm working with somebody right now. She runs 16 charter schools. She said the waiting list, they don't have room for everybody. Everybody's pulling kids out of the schools. But what if you can't? What would you suggest to that mom that is stuck with this?
Right. Well, it's an objective reality that American public education, aka government schooling, is failing our children, not just in test scores and outcomes, but the availability of resources to address the myriad of problems, the exploitation within these schools, the grooming, and the miseducation the activist political education or indoctrination being injected into schools. Parents are sick of it. And it brings us back to why I fight for school choice, because every parent has the right, as long as they are not abusing their child, to decide what education they feel is best for their child. And in the spirit of that freedom and that right of a parent's right, they should be able to decide with their own tax dollars, because we pay for the public education system. We should be the ones as parents to decide what's best for our kids. The teachers don't know our kids better than us, and the government sure as heck doesn't know our children better than us or what's best for them. And so if we have the power back, the people have the power back to make the decision that is best for our children. Do you think that a poor Black mother in a failing school in Baltimore, in which $16,500 designated dollars per head is being spent when they don't have heaters, is going to choose to put their child back in that seat in that failing school where their reading outcomes are minimal? No, they wouldn't choose that. And so that is what we're up against, is a system that wants to make those decisions for us as parents, because they feel entitled and they feel like they know what's best, and they don't. And so school choice is an equality issue. It is the civil rights issue of our time, because if our kids don't have the equal access to a quality education, they're then enslaved into a system they don't want to be in, with no choices.
Right.
And that's sadly why we see minorities suffering more, because they are trapped in poor failing schools. And so it's a right on so many issues, but then you see this rise in educators grooming and abusing children.
Yes.
It's becoming a common thing.
It's the norm. It's the norm.
Yeah, exactly.
become,
we're seeing it every day.
It has
So
really
so many reasons
been speeding up. And I also want to point out, there is something called parental autonomy, which is part of our Constitution. And the parent has the right to make decisions, unless there's some sort of horrible bodily harm, which again, the agenda these days is equating that to gender, but we're going to get into that. But I want to point out that the teachers unions, because people again will say to me, why is this happening? Who started this? Why all of a sudden is it escalating, right? The teachers unions are so powerful. They are a business. And I always say our children are the currency. And all of these issues we talk about are really don't belong to a political party, right? It's about protection of children, protection of families, okay? But in doing all of my research, these powerful teachers unions are donating and raising millions upon millions and giving it to the Democratic Party. So we'll leave that for a second. But, connecting the dots for the audience is they're going to follow, those agendas, correct? And let's get into, because I'm in shock. And I can't believe this gender. You come from show business. I started out in the music business, actually, with the jingles, okay? And I started out actually with MTV. We did taglines, in the day. This is before you're born, but, I don't know all this trans stuff, and being in show business, we should have seen like a lot of it, right? We should have seen stuff. But let's talk about, we have a youth mental health crisis complicated by COVID. And we could sit here all day and night and talk about that one. I talk to medical professionals constantly. They're in fear for our children and our families. So talk about, a little bit about COVID, coming out of that. And there's so many things to ask you. Let's get into this education and gender, because the kids can't hold a pencil. The kids can't throw a ball. They can't track to they can't read because they're so used to devices. So I'm throwing a lot at you. So just go for it. The floor is yours, because it's so shocking and it's so criminal. And people should be out in the middle of Times Square down the street from me screaming about this. And of course they're not. They're just selling pot in the middle of the street. That's what they're doing.
Right. Well, what we've noticed since COVID is that there's been an exponential increase in vulnerabilities. Now, why has that happened? And people want to blame it on a virus, but the reality is it was the response that was more harmful than the virus. Locking down children only exacerbated our reports to NCMEC for child exploitation, the reports flooding for suicide and anxiety, mental health issues skyrocketing to the point where a hospital, children's hospital in Colorado, designated a public health emergency because they didn't have enough beds. So this is a problem that spanned across the U.S. Now let's look at gender for a minute. Where are these pockets of, the children transitioning, this rapid onset transitioning? It seems to be in politically designated areas. That's not a natural phenomenon occurring. That's not a natural, mental issue. That is something that is a social contagion, which is being stimulated by this indoctrination. And so you have children that are having these vulnerabilities increased supernaturally with this indoctrination that what otherwise didn't exist. And that vulnerability is creating other vulnerabilities and destabilizing their sense of identity. And I talk about the 3 Ds: desensitization, destabilization, and ultimately destruction. And we're destroying children by forcing them to be online without social interaction, healthy social interaction, by forced masking and forcing them online. We are destabilizing their identity by telling them that they're born in the wrong bodies and that every sense biology is not real or accurate, and that their parents are wrong, undermining the home values. Teachers are entering into a inappropriate relationship where they're professing to be their mothers in some cases and saying, hey, I'm your new family. Your secret is safe with me. We won't tell. They're harvesting secret relationships that parents don't know about. It honestly checks all the boxes for grooming behaviors of what educators are never supposed to do, let alone any adult that was somebody else's child. So, we're having parental rights violated. And so that's the part about that is that parents are losing the right to protect their kids, because if they're not legally allowed to know about it, how can they protect their kids? So if kids now are able to, like in Nashville, Tennessee, where my organization exposed what's happening at Vanderbilt, if they're able to go get gender affirming care, which is really a pathway to child mutilation, and parents don't know about it, parents can't be held accountable or really be able to protect their children. So that's why it's very important. And this is an assault on children. And listen, gender dysphoria is a real mental health crisis. There are some people, a very small percentage of our population, who suffer from that. And I think they should get the mental health resources. But a gender affirming care model is dangerous, and it is coercing into one outcome, which is the child mutilation and surgical procedures, which are a cash cow, a multi-million dollar.
There you go. You got it. Yeah.
That's it. That's what's happening.
It's always follow the money. I hate to cut it right down to everything, whether, you're talking COVID, that's another program, everything is money, 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 money. What did you think what about this Boston Children's Hospital? I was horrified the other day seeing this. What were your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that? Because that is just, it's such normalization that has come along, in my opinion, just like the last two years, really heavily, all this stuff. And the last year in particular about all of this. What did you think about that?
I mean, honestly, it's mind blowing. Where do
That's
we
it,
start?
mind blowing.
Where do we start? The fact that, that we have doctors admitting they start this transition process at 3 years old, or the fact that all of these drugs to, stop puberty are off label. So they're not even approved by the FDA, which supposedly was a big standard that people were, harping on and on about, being FDA approved drugs. Right. And, for hydrochloroquine, how that wasn't FDA approved for this use or that use. And people were, saying, hey, this is dangerous. Well, what we're experimenting with off-label drugs on children, including Lupron, which is used to chemically castrate sex offenders, pedophiles. We're putting this in children's bodies, not with no long-term safety studies. And, if anybody's ever researched gender transition regret, I mean, that is the saddest place I've visited.
It's the most depressing. I've spoken to a lot of people, actually, a lot of adults who went through this when they were younger. But I also have an issue of, I'm a little bit even, of course, it's a real thing, but, leave the kids out of it. It's like, just forget it. We're not even talking 18 and older. Leave the kids out of this entire thing, right?
And it's abusive and exploitive to children. Their brains are not developed. Their identity isn't developed. And adults doing this to children belong in jail.
And I keep asking, who are these doctors doing this? Like, we don't really hear a lot about doctors, right? Like, where's the accountability for that. There was also a new study this week that all of this cannabis, where it's legal now, for instance, right here in New York State, the kids are really suffering all this, which I had heard anyway, psychotic breaks and episodes because they're overindulging, even though it's supposed to be for 21. The kids get their hands on anything they want to get their hands on. And the teens are really suffering. They're making the packaging very attractive. You know, it looks like candy, it looks like cookies, Pop-Tarts that come in the box, we all know. Now it's called Pop-Tarts. It looks just like Pop-Tarts. And these kids are suffering in the medical community that I talk to. They're saying nobody's even talking about this in the media, what they're dealing with in emergency rooms, in places where it's legal. And I want to know this harm for our children. What do you think about this, Landon? I mean, the only thing I can think of, why is all of this? It's not even, I have a lot of gay friends and they're up in arms about this whole trans thing. They are angry. They are horrified about this. They're like me, leave the kids alone. What's the bottom line? You know, destruction, obviously. Why? What are your thoughts on that? Where is all this going?
Well, children are the easiest to and the most vulnerable to influence and exploit. And this stems from an ideological agenda that sees the only path forward as to owning the youth and influencing the youth so that they can influence the next generation and ultimately the outcomes of how everything is run, how our entire world is run. And it comes, you know, from my opinion, from Marxism. You can tie every Marxist goal to a policy or a change that's been implemented in the last 4 years. So there is an agenda, and some of these people are very open about it, about this agenda of what they believe in socialism, Marxism, and communism. I mean, communism is just socialism with lipstick. So whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. It's the same agenda, and it's ultimately to control and exploit people from the top, and where people lose their autonomy, they lose their rights. And that is exactly what we've all experienced and what we are currently experiencing, with all of our rights still under attack, and parental rights, the efforts to reduce the age of consent, and all of this. And when you were talking about the targeting of children with drugs, right? Again, we're increasing the vulnerabilities almost every way you can. So it's this coordinated effort that's happening. And some people aren't even aware they're participating in it. I'm not saying there's this nefarious agenda where everyone's aware that they're participating in it, but people have been indoctrinated to participate in it.
It's
this greater good.
Right.
Yes, it's normalized, exactly. And the fentanyl too. We have kids who think they're taking, CBD or whatever, and it's actually fentanyl that looks like candy. And it's killing our children. We could fill up an entire stadium of how many children have been killed by fentanyl. I mean, this is a national security crisis, and it just pours across our border. And
that's what the media should be. That's another thing the media is not doing anything about. Not at all talking about. It leaks when people say, that's on the border. And I'm like, no, all of that fentanyl, all those drugs come into each and every community in the United States and affect all of us. And like you said, this is a national, emergency crisis, an emergency threat, and people don't understand any of that is going on. What do you think? Okay, because it's like getting hit on the head every day with a hammer. That's the way I look at this. It's just like, so people, again, will tune out. That is why freedomforever.us, Landon Starbuck, Lynn's Warriors, we provide a grassroots level to help them understand what's going on. Give us some tools from your end. I mean, you went over them. People have to participate and first step, participate, right? Communicate, right? If somebody contacts Freedom Forever, tell us what would happen.
Right. Well,
what if they ask you a question? That's always a tricky one, because I'm always like, well, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a police officer. And I try to direct them to resources if it goes in that direction. But people can even just join you and volunteer. So when you do have your next, which I'm cheering you on, I'm going to make sure I'm going to be at the next one at the border, volunteer for something like that. But tell us how you would direct moms, maybe you talk to in the supermarket. I don't know, if somebody starts talking to you online, what would you say to them with all this going on? Because you and me are kind of tough, but most people can't, and I don't blame them. They can't be tough.
Right. Well, a lot of people have a hard time dealing with this issue. And I try to, instead of telling them all the horror stories, just cut to the activism. This is what we do
Right.
about it. So no excuses. I don't want anybody to come across, my work and go, I still don't know what to do. So I try to answer that question. And we're working on something called the Freedom Model, which is an activist toolkit,
Oh,
an
good.
actual little book that actually tells people everything they can do from the inside out, from their homes to the
Oh, good.
community to policy, all of
That's what
that.
we
So we're
need.
really
Right.
excited, yeah, that we're going to be getting that out the end of this year. We've been working really hard on that. But on our website, we have a volunteer form. So if people want to get involved, that is why I set this organization up the way it is. We do not take salaries. We are 100% volunteer run. And so we find your unique skill set, whatever that may be, and find a way to use it so that you can make a
Right.
difference with an organization. Of course, we love and appreciate donations because we're volunteer. We have to have a way to self-sustain, but we want mostly to engage people into prevention-based survivor-informed activism, and that is what we do every single day. So I would encourage people to fill out that form, start the process, and then we match people according to their skill sets or their time with a participation activism that would be appropriate.
I also want to go back to money. Donations are important. Freedom Forever is most deserving. I don't care if people send $1 and we appreciate and love everybody, $1 or $1,000,000. Money is needed. You don't take monies from any government or anything like that. It's strictly out of your own pocket, right?
Mhm.
It's strictly volunteers. So I'm going to say, and I'm going to have all this in the body of this video, for people to donate and all that for Freedom Forever. No, you deserve. People should be sending you loads of checks. Are you kidding? For the work you do, your honesty. I want to talk about. I mean, I just can't say enough gushing about you because I'm surrounded by so much noise and I don't see a lot of action. Right. And I think we can both agree. We both work on policy and getting that out there to our followers and the public and all that. But there's so much red tape with Congress. So we have
Right.
Earn It Act. We have COSA right now, Kids Online Safety Act. But in the
Mhm.
meantime, as we continue working on all of those things, we need Freedom Forever on the ground, doing this one-on-one or peer-to-peer, whatever you want to call it. So warriors listening, donations, you're going to find the link in the body of this video. What do you think about some of these policies? Do you want to get into that at all? Do you
Absolutely.
do you
Yeah.
think where do fighting big tech is like, I'll just leave it at that. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, what has been allowed to happen to
Right.
children online is a crime against humanity. It
Right.
continues every single day, and there's zero accountability. And
Yes.
for parents who have the illusion that they can protect their kids online on social media using the safety features that these social media companies claim to have, it is a complete delusion. And there's no way to fully protect your kids on social media besides keeping them off it until they're old enough to have the digital self defense skills to navigate a world of pedophiles, porn, and rape. And if you don't want your kid exposed to that or seeing that or being exposed to an eating disorder, the algorithms that perpetuate anxiety and depression, then why are we exposing our children? We have a choice. And it's hard sometimes to do the right thing, but
Yes.
if we all make that choice, and this is going to be in the freedom model, these
Right.
directives of these are the conclusions that we've arrived at, not just my opinions. It's the survivors listening to their stories, listening to their experiences, and asking them, hundreds of them, what would have changed for you? And almost every single one of them, porn played a role. Almost every single one of them having access to social media was the doorway to that world of exploitation, to being groomed online. In fact, one survivor said it best. She said, the whole world online, the culture groomed me for my trafficker. And so when we're saying, we're giving our kids these smartphones with these apps and in this world, we are handing them over to a world that they cannot self regulate. And it's unfair to put that on our children and expect them to be able to come out of it unscathed. We're putting our kids in harm's way, and big tech is
Right.
lying to us. So before I
Yes.
get off on a tangent, going back to that, our politicians have failed us.
Yes.
They've lied to us. They've put on theater, making us believe they're fighting against big tech. But the problem is, big tech has been lining their pocketbooks for decades.
Yes.
So their incentives are unfortunately in the wrong place. And if you want to know why nothing's been done, look at who donates to your politicians. Look who answers, who they answer to. And so I believe in the Earn It Act. I believe it's only bipartisan piece of legislation that we have. We have to try, we have to push, we have to advocate more. This is why our work, that what you do with grassroots mobilization, activating people, if you have no people to activate, to put
Right.
pressure on these people for accountability, nothing is going to get done. So we have to try. We can't disengage from that process. However, we have to be realistic, and we cannot trust politicians to solve these problems for us. And we certainly cannot trust big tech.
Well said. I want you, I always say to people, uh, all of this, the apps, the platforms, it's like opening your front door and just allowing strangers to come in. You would never do that. Like, I try to make it very relatable so people can understand, despite how much talk about, around here, end of school, everybody puts lawn signs like, congratulations, Ashley, in the name of the high school on their front lawn, all these different kindergarten, congratulations, John and I'm like, no, you shouldn't even have that. They know how old your child is. They know the name, they know where they live. People just don't seem to get it. And that's the part that just boggles my mind, that a study also came out this week that said 1 in 4 kids, so this is like 9 to 18, 1 in 4, 25%, will meet in real time a stranger they met online. That's 1 in 4 kids. Okay. Also, 68% of the parents don't know anything their kids are doing online. So we both know, if those are the studies, we know the numbers are higher. It's 68%. They have no idea. They've never looked. They never talked about it. Nothing. And 85% admit, again, it's higher, that they use the tool, any of these tools, laptops, Chromebooks, phones, anything, gaming, as a babysitter. How are we going to get, because we're screaming at the top of our lungs,
Right.
with facts and truths. We're not just saying these things, right? How are we going to get this mindset to really snowball? What are your thoughts on that? Because I'm trying each and every day. I'm like, if I just can affect one person a day, I've done my job, because it's tough.
Right. Well, I think
And
that
you're a
we have
mom, you're a mom. So you have this firsthand experience on dealing with kids and how to deal with it. Give some tips.
right. Yeah. I mean, I think that we first have to understand that normal does not equate to healthy or right. Whatever has been normalized doesn't mean we should accept it. It doesn't mean that it's healthy or good for our
So
children.
ask
And
questions.
so,
Right.
yes, exactly. That is very important. And also, I use this rhetoric intentionally. Become warrior parents. Revolution in parenting. What that is the degree that we need to be responding to this level of assault on our children. If we're in a war on our children, it requires us to be warriors for children. And this is perhaps why my TED Talk was banned, is because I came out and said it. The number one way to protect your child from online exploitation and sextortion and horrible mental health outcomes is to not put your kid online on these social media
Right.
platforms before they are ready. And they're not ready. They're not ready at 10 and 12 and 13 and 14. They're actually going through the most vulnerable time
Yes.
of the trajectory of their growth, when they need you the most to put those boundaries in place to protect them. And that doesn't mean isolating them and not teaching them the truth about the real world. It means raising warrior children equipped to deal with it at an appropriate time, so that when the time comes that they're exposed to social media, they can use it intentionally and safely and avoid all the pitfalls and predators that are coming their way.
And what do you think about monitoring tools and things of that nature? Are you in favor of them? Talk a little bit
Yeah,
about that, because listen, we live in a digital world. We're never going to get these devices. We can't control other parents, what they actually do or buy for their children, but
right.
we can try to sway them, which I try to do with monitoring tools and routers and things of that nature. What are your thoughts on all that stuff?
Right. Well, we partner with Protect Young Eyes, and they do the best work at
I
protecting
think
the
so.
router. Yeah, at educating parents and all of that, on the tech side of things. And we absolutely have to safeguard our homes from the inside out, no matter what. Even if we say no social media, no devices, we still have TVs that are smart TVs that have apps that have access to YouTube and all these things. So the world we're living in, it requires a significant effort and responsibility on the
Right.
parents' part. And so that can't go ignored. There's no like ignoring that process that has to happen to keep our kids safe. And we need those resources. However, I'm very cautious about sending the message that if we have these protections, you
Right.
don't have to parent, you don't have to pay attention, because that's the wrong message. Even with all of these protections in place, the rate of technology is moving so fast that doorways open that we don't even know about. And our kids are being wired to be able to use technology at a pace that we don't understand. And
Right.
it's almost intuitive to them. And they're going to be exposed to things that we weren't even able to see coming. So I think that it's very important to have some firm boundaries, but also have, that for a parent who's not going to listen, at the very least, no, these are the ways that you can try to protect. But I'm very intentional about saying social media is just a no, not no with protections, not no with this. It's just a hard no. There is no way, even with all those protections, to say 100% your kid's not going to be exposed to harmful content. And I don't know with that, reality, why parents would continue just because it's fun, like there's no greater, pro that outweighs all of those dangers and cons. I always use the pedophile meetup night at the bowling alley analogy because that seems to resonate with people. I tell them about, hey, there's this really fun family fun center, there's bowling, there's this and that. They do make porn behind a doorway in this bathroom. There is a pedophile meetup night, but that happens over on this alley. So as long as you just stay in this area, you should be fine. Would you drop your kids off? They'd be like, you're crazy. Yeah, I would never do that, right? But that is essentially the same thing. And
I
there's this
love that.
disconnect between the digital reality and space and the real world. And the irony, and if you talk to operators that rescue children, is that your kid is safer in the cul-de-sac riding their bike with the neighborhood kids than they are on the device. That's the reality of how the statistics bear out and how these exploitation and trafficking cases are occurring.
Because still I get that they're afraid of the kids on the streets playing outside. That old saying, and I've heard you say this, that old white van story, when in reality it's the phone in their hand is
Yes.
the predator. I always say wherever the kids are, so are the predators. Final thoughts. What would you like to leave us with? You filled us in a lot about what you have going on. Freedom Forever, Warriors Freedom Forever .us. I urge all of you to go there. I'll have a lot of information about Landon Starbuck in the body of this video. I urge all of you to donate, volunteer, get on board, grassroots, boots on the ground. What do you want to leave us with? What do you see as the immediate future? What's happening? Again, we're back to school time. Final thoughts.
Final thoughts are,
That's a big question, I know, but it's like,
yeah, no, it's usually my same thoughts about all of this is like when we get into these deep discussions, there's usually a feeling of heaviness and dread and, oh, I have to go do all these things. And it's normal to feel that way. It's a heavy world and there's a lot of things that are being thrown at us. And this is a hard generation to parent in, let alone be a child in. And so that is why I encourage parents to recognize that we do have the power. We are warriors and that our children can be raised to be warriors as well with our leadership. And we are more powerful than we realize. We have the tools. We know what we need to do. And the freedom model is going to help parents and everyone in our community participate in that process. So that's the good news, is that we are not beholden to big tech. We are not beholden to our government. We decide what comes in our homes. We decide what goes in our children's mouths and bodies and ears and eyes. And we can cultivate a world that is not just safe, but is shaping who they are from their identity to what they're exposed to. And we get to shape that. So we are very powerful in the trajectory of what kind of human beings we are raising in this world. And so that's a great responsibility, and it's heavy, but it's also incredibly empowering to know that you have the power. And perhaps some people just need to realize that they need to reclaim that power that they've given to public school, that they've given to therapists, that they've given to other people, and recognize they're your children and you decide what their future looks like.
Landon Starbuck, I couldn't have said that better myself. We have to take back the power, and we have to be cheerleaders for other parents and help them along with tools and resources. Warriors, the website is freedomforever.us. Landon Starbuck, I thank you so much for being, at the forefront of leading the way, of getting out there every single day, putting yourself on the line to educate our country and for the incredible work you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on, Lynn.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.